Hi everyone, my name's Jordan and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing my April wrap-up. April was a pretty good month. I read a bunch of bangers, so without further ado, let's get into it. The first book I read was A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This is the third book in A Game of Thrones, and I've heard bad things about these audiobooks, but I did this one on audio and it really wasn't that bad. I agree the narrator had some very weird voices for some of the characters, but for the most part, I was still able to connect with the story and enjoy the story. And this book is honestly just as good as people make it out to be. I still feel like I don't connect to the characters as much as I do in some of my favorite series of all time, but I think this is one of the most meticulously plotted stories and well-crafted stories that I've read. So George R.R. Martin is doing something right. This book was still very good even though I didn't connect to the characters. So if you don't know about A Song of Ice and Fire, it is a medieval fantasy story that is very political. The magic is kind of like secondary to the story almost. Like the magic is not an everyday thing. A lot of people don't even know about magic in the story, but there are dragons, there is magic, so it is a fantasy story for sure, but the focus is on the politics of the world and the political machinations that go into A Game of Thrones. And overall, this book was just very, very good. They are huge. I recently posted my May TBR. I know that everyone is trying to read A Feast of Crows in May. I'm gonna have to push that till June. There's no way I'll get to it with the other books on my list, but I do want to read A Feast for Crows soon, but I will not be getting into it in May. But this book was very, very good. Definitely did probably put it on my top 10 favorite fantasy series. Maybe. I'd have to look at my list and see, but it is definitely up there with some of the best I've ever read. Is it my favorite? I'm not totally sure yet. I'd have to look at the list again, but it is one of the most well-crafted stories I've ever read. So props to George R.R. Martin. This book was incredible. Next up, I have Assassin's Fate by Robin Hobb. I've done it, everyone. I have finished The Realm of the Elderlings. I will be doing a video soon of why you should read The Realm of the Elderlings for if you haven't read it. I may also later do a full series review. I haven't decided yet, like a full series spoiler review. By the time you're watching this video, there will have been a Fits in the Fool live stream that I was on over on Alex on Tall Guy Reads channel. So I'll link that down below. Go check that out. But guys, Assassin's Fate was just as devastating as everyone said it was. It is the last book of a series, of a very large series, and it does follow Fits in the Fool, hence the name, The Fits in the Fool. And the way Robin Hobb wrapped this series up was just phenomenal. I can't really get into it because it is like the 15th or 16th book in a huge series, so can't get into it. But this book was beautiful. It was incredibly well crafted. The plotting from Assassin's Apprentice to Assassin's Fate is just phenomenal, unparalleled in fiction. I think finishing Realm of the Elderlings, this might have moved Realm of the Elderlings up past The Locked Tomb for my favorite series. I'm not 100% sure. This is definitely a much more emotional series for me. At the end of a few of the books in the series, I was a mess, this being one of them. So I highly, highly, highly recommend the series. Be on the lookout for a video of why you should read The Realm of the Elderlings, because you should. Everyone should. It should be required reading in schools. Like, this series is just so special, and I love it very much. If you don't know what it's about, a quick synopsis on, I guess, the Farseer trilogy, which is the first trilogy. This is a overarching series that covers 5 series. And it follows this man named Fitz, who is a young bastard boy who's dropped off at this castle where his father is the king in waiting, and his father, out of shame, kind of retires and moves off to the countryside. And he is raised by the person that runs the stables, and he is also trained to be an assassin for the king. And it just follows his story from young boyhood to old age, and it is such an incredible character study on Fitz, and I, again, highly, highly recommend this series. Next up, I read Morningstar by Pierce Brown. This is the third book in the Red Rising saga. This book I did really enjoy. However, I think I did myself a disservice by listening to the audiobook. I knew that I didn't love the audiobook of Red Rising, but I figured now that I had a better grasp and a better enjoyment level with Golden Sun, that I would be able to do the audiobook for Morningstar. And there's nothing like wrong with the audiobook. It's not a bad audiobook, but for whatever reason, I can't connect to the characters as well in the audiobook of this series. And so while I really enjoyed the plot and I listened to the audiobook very quickly, I found it very good, I just didn't connect to it the same way I did Golden Sun. However, this still was a very good book, a very good wrap up to the first part of this series, and I'm excited to get on to Iron Gold. If you don't know what Red Rising is about, it's about a young man named Darrow who is part of a cast of people called Reds who live on Mars and are trying to terraform Mars in order for it to be ready for human habitation. However, when his wife dies, she asks him to change the world for the better, and he later finds out that his entire life has been a lie. There are already humans living on Mars, and there's a whole color-coded caste system for humanity, with Golds being the strongest and best of humanity. And so he, with the help of some others, infiltrates the Gold caste and is trying to destroy it from within. And so this is just basically a big revolutionary story. In the first book, I found Darrow incredibly annoying and I didn't like him at all. But then in Golden Sun, he grew on me, and I think that he grew on me even more in Morningstar. I think that this series is pretty good. Actually, it's really good. I wouldn't say it's my favorite yet, but I do still have the second series to go. So starting that in May. Next up, I read Wayward by Amelia Hart. This is a newish release that is like a generational fantasy story that was just so good. I loved it so much. I listened to the audiobook and it was so atmospheric. It's a dark, dark story about the women in this family that have these magical powers that have to do with nature, and just the different ways in which society kind of knocks them down just for being women, and the things they do to protect themselves and survive. And it was beautiful. It was dark, it was tragic, it was uplifting, it was a beautiful story of womanhood and survival and fighting against what is holding you back. And I really, really loved this book, and the cover is beautiful, and it's a pretty short book, so I highly recommend this book for anyone. It was really, really good. Next up, I read The Two Towers by J.R.R. Tolkien. I finally got to it. This is the second book in the Lord of the Rings series. I did listen to the audiobook of this, and I feel like, again, I kind of did myself a disservice. I think I would have enjoyed it more if I had read it physically, but I still did really, really enjoy it. The action in this book was really good. We got some more character growth. Sam and Frodo are amazing, adorable. I love them so much. If you exist as a human, you know about the Lord of the Rings, so I won't get into a big synopsis of it, but this one we basically continued on the story. There was a lot more action in this one than Fellowship of the Ring. It was a lot less travel, I guess. I mean, there was still a lot of travel, but there was more action in the travel than there was in Fellowship of the Ring. But Tolkien's writing and his prose is, I'm preaching to the choir because everyone else has read the series but me. His prose is beautiful, and while some people think it's a little flowery, I like flowery prose, so I really liked it, and I'm really excited to read the last one. That one I'm definitely going to do physically so that I can kind of like really, really grasp the end of this series and really appreciate it to its fullest. So this book was also very good. Next up, I read The Ember Blade by Chris Wooding. This is actually probably a new favorite. This book was one of my 12 books recommended by 12 booktubers, and this was recommended to me by Petrick Leo. This book is like a very classic fantasy story that follows like a chosen one trope, and it follows these two young boys who kind of get caught in a bad situation. They're part of a group of people whose land has been overrun and taken over by this like empire, and they're basically sent to a slave camp. And from there, their story grows as they try to escape and they try to change the world for the better for their people. And it is a very classic, revolutionary, chosen one story full of magic and adventure and camaraderie and found family. It's got like all my favorite tropes, and it is so well written. The ending, the last like 100 pages was so good, and I've heard mixed things about the second one, but I'm still really excited to read it because I'm excited to continue with these characters. This book, I keep thinking about it. Like, I finished it, and I know a lot of people say that they think about books a long time, and that's always been kind of hard for me. Like, I finish a book and then I move on to the next one, and I don't think about it a lot afterwards unless it really, really stuck with me. So like The Locked Tomb, I think about a lot. The Realm of the Elderlings, I think about a lot, but not a lot of books am I like thinking about, even if I loved it. Like, there's so many books I absolutely loved, and I don't think about it much after I finished it, except for when I'm doing these videos, which is part of why I like doing these videos, is to like really dive deep into my thoughts and like really collect it all. But this one I have thought about, and the characters in it, and the found family aspects, and the magic, and the story itself, like, it was just so magical and so fun, and I am very excited to continue this series. Next up, I read the first volume of Jujutsu Kaisen, which is a manga series. It's also an anime series that my husband watches, which is why I decided to read it. And it's basically about these people that hunt curses, which are basically like demons. And again, the first one's pretty short. I only have just gotten into the story, but it seems really good so far. It seems full of magic and gore and fun stuff, so I'm excited to continue it. I already have the second one checked out, so pumped to be reading these. Next up, I read The Faithless by C.L. Clarke. This is the second book in the, I don't remember what the series itself is called, Magic of the Lost. The first one is The Unbroken. I really liked this book. The cover is really why I bought it, because I don't even own The Unbroken. Like, now I just need to get The Unbroken, but I loved the cover when it was dropped. This is a series that is also about an empire that overruns this country and kind of indoctrinates a bunch of children to be soldiers for them. And one of these soldiers kind of gets involved with the heir to the throne, and they are trying to make life better, but also like they're on opposing sides, essentially. It is a fantasy story. There are magical elements. It is very good. There's a sapphic romance that I really, really enjoy. And overall, it is just a fun book. They're not huge. They're not super complex to where you don't understand what's going on. And I just really like the romance aspect in them. I feel like so many people complain about romance in fantasy, but I do think it has a place in fantasy. Not in every fantasy book, but there's definitely a place for romance within a fantasy story. And I don't just mean like fantasy romance as a series, because those are more like romance with fantasy in them. I mean fantasy with romance in them, like where it's mostly a fantasy story and there are romantic elements. A lot of people just complain about it and don't want romance in their stories. I do. I like romance in my stories. So I think the romance in this is very well done, and I think the balance between the romance and the rest of the plot is also very well balanced. So overall, this is a very fun series, and I'm excited for the next one to come out. Next up, I read A Touch of Light by Thiago Abdallah. This is a self-published book that is a fantasy story, and I struggled with this one. I think that the premise is really cool, but the execution just really wasn't there for me. I didn't really connect with any of the characters. I also found that I didn't really even understand what the book was about until about like 50% in, and by then I was just really not feeling it. I wasn't connected. I didn't really love it even by the end. I do think there were some pros. I think that the concept was really cool. It's basically a pretty political fantasy with a lot of magic involved, and there's war and there's battles, and premise is there. Again, I just feel like the execution wasn't for me, and this book, I just don't think it was for me. I might continue with the series because the ending was pretty fun, but it won't be anytime soon. Next up, I read Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh. This is a new sci-fi release that I've heard mixed things about, but I really enjoyed it. It is about a woman who is part of the space station of the last survivors of Earth, and it is like a very strictly regimented life she leads, and everyone on this planet leads, or everyone on the space station, I mean. I don't want to get too far into it because there's a bunch of reveals after that, but it is a very, very cool story, and the story plotting is really good, and there's like alternate universes, there's aliens, there's space travel, like it's just got everything in it that you would love. Some of the complaints I've heard are that the themes and statements the story is trying to make are a little heavy-handed. I kind of agree with it, but I listened to the audiobook, so I was kind of getting through it faster. I wonder if that would have been a bigger problem for me if I had been reading it physically, but because I listened to it in like 2 days, I never really felt like anything felt too heavy-handed theme-wise. There was one scene at the end that kind of stuck out to me as kind of insensitive, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word. But other than that, I think that the story was really fun. I really enjoyed the characters. I really enjoyed the messages it was getting across and the themes it represented. So I really enjoyed this, and I think that I will look out for more books by Emily Tesh. So that is all of the books I read in April. It is currently April 30th, but I do not see myself finishing a book today because it is a busy day I have ahead of me. So that is it. As you guys know, if you watched my May TBR, my May is going to be nuts, and I probably won't read too much in May, or at least not as much as I normally do, but I'm going to do my best. Thank you guys for watching. If you could please like, comment, and subscribe, let me know down below what you read in April, what was the best book you read, and the worst book you read. If you really like my content, please hit the notification bell to be notified every time I post a new video, and if you want to help choose my TBR, you can join my Patreon down below, as well as patron exclusive reading sprints, etc, etc. A Touch of Light that I read this month was one of my patron picks. It was picked for me by Alex on Tall Guy Reads, so every month I have one patron pick I will be reading, and if you want to help choose that, you can join my Patreon down below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, your support means the world to me, and until next time, thank you guys.